Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public policy. We're broadcast on KGPT channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me for my blog, The Voice for Liberty. That's at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. I cover things that may not be covered by other news media in Wichita and Kansas, or if we do cover the same news, I'll do it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, because these are the things that are important. These are also the things that are so often under attack by our governments, be it at the federal, state, or local level. So please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send a couple times a week. You can like The Voice for Liberty on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and if you want to contact me, you'll find my email address there at wichitaliberty.org, or just remember bob.weeks@gmail.com. Readers of the Wichita Eagle might be excused for not understanding the economic realities of a proposed tax giveaway to a local development. That's a problem, and I'll explain why. Well, this week's meeting of the Wichita City Council held an item of economic development that might be confusing to citizens unless they read the meeting's agenda packet. Here's what the Wichita Eagle reported to its readers. The owner of the former Wichita Mall is seeking $3.6 million in industrial revenue bonds for a new parking lot, a request that the Wichita City Council will consider at its Tuesday meeting. And at the Tuesday meeting, the City Council did approve it. Now, the Wichita Eagle article doesn't present much more about the economics of this transaction and its importance to public policy. That's unfortunate, as after reading this article, citizens could be excused for thinking that the city is making a loan to a private entity. That's what it sounds like the city is making a loan. But that is not the purpose of industrial revenue bonds, or IRBs as they're known here in Kansas. By issuing these bonds, the city of Wichita is not lending any money and is not guaranteeing or even hinting that any loan will be repaid. Instead, city documents, but not the Wichita Eagle reporting, city documents tell us that Coco Properties LLC will purchase these bonds. Well, who is Coco, you may be wondering? Well, it's the company that owns the Wichita Mall property, the same company that wants to borrow money to repair its parking lot. Now, by purchasing the IRBs, the company is, in effect, lending money to itself. Well, it's possible that Coco may seek other loans to get the funds to buy the IRBs, but if so, these would be private transactions and therefore not a matter of public policy. So, if Coco is buying these IRBs itself, what is the purpose of the transaction? Why is Coco taking $3.6 million from one of its corporate pockets and transferring it to another corporate pocket and incurring costs in the process? At this point, if all you've done is read the Wichita Eagle story, you may be confused. Actually, you'd be uninformed, because the Eagle story says nothing about who will purchase these industrial revenue bonds. Further, the Eagle story tells us nothing about the reason for this transaction, which is to avoid paying two forms of taxes. Now, the City Council agenda packet, which is available on the city's website, explains that property tax forgiveness accompanies the industrial revenue bonds. Specifically, it tells us the one-year estimated tax abatement on Coco's proposed $3.6 million real property improvements when complete would be $108,000 per year. The value of a 100% real property tax exemption as applicable to taxing jurisdictions is City of Wichita, $29,000, Sedgwick County, $26,000, State of Kansas, $1,350, and the Wichita School District, $51,000. These are annual numbers, and they would be repeated for 5 years plus another 5 years if the City Council approves based on council review. So that's potentially over $1 million of forgiven property taxes. And that's not all. City documents say city staff will also apply for a sales tax exemption. Now, no value was given for how much sales tax Coco may avoid paying, so I asked and was told that the value is $126,000 in sales tax that this company will not pay. So there it is. The purpose of the industrial revenue bonds transaction is to avoid paying taxes, both property tax and sales tax. So that inspires a question. In its application, Coco says it has spent millions renovating the building in order to attract tenants, and that this was done without public incentive or financing. But now we're told that the parking lot can't be repaired without two forms of tax giveaways, that the parking lot can't be repaired without over $1 million of subsidy. Well, when the city finds it necessary to forgive taxes in order to make investment possible, it tells us that taxes in Wichita are too high. These high taxes are blocking investment. In some ways, I don't blame Coco for seeking relief from property taxes. In the past on Wichita Liberty TV, I've shown you how property taxes for commercial property in Wichita are very high compared to the rest of the nation. So it is understandable that landlords want lower property taxes. But when the city reduces taxes on a piecemeal basis like this, the cost of government is spread over a smaller base. For those people and businesses that are still part of that smaller base of taxpayers, well, their taxes go up. This includes other commercial landlords that are competitors to Coco, the company that is seeking relief from paying a substantial amount of taxes. Now, Coco has a competitive advantage over other commercial landlords. So we have a question. Are commercial property taxes in Wichita so high that this investment cannot proceed without this targeted tax relief? It's either that, or this is another example of cronyism at Wichita City Hall. That is, a simple taxpayer-funded gift to a city council crony. And one more thing. Boosters of the proposed Wichita sales tax, part of which is scheduled to be used for economic development, they tell us that Wichita has only $1.65 million per year to fund incentives. Well, the incentives being considered for Coco are worth over $1 million in total, but have no cash cost to the city. These incentives are not part of the $1.65 million annual budget for incentives, but the incentives do have a cost that is paid for by taxpayers when the city, county, state, and school district spend and expect taxpayers to make up this missing tax revenue. And just one more thing. Wichita Eagle, please get on the ball. Why didn't our newspaper report the most important economic purpose of the revenue bonds, which was the avoidance of taxes? Instead, the newspaper presented a story that makes it seem as though the city is lending money, which is definitely not the case. We're left wondering if reporters at our state's largest newspaper understand these matters. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Now that Uber has started service in Wichita, the city faces a decision. Will Wichita move into the future by embracing Uber, or will it remain stuck in the past? Uber is a ride-sharing service, although that word doesn't really describe it adequately at all. Here's how it works. People apply to be Uber drivers. Uber then does background checks to its satisfaction. Drivers must have a relatively late model car. And if Uber accepts drivers, they then receive a smartphone with an app installed on it, and they're in business. Now, customers who want to use Uber must have a smartphone. Then customers create an account and make payment arrangements such as credit card, Google Wallet, or PayPal. And then when you, the Uber customer, want a ride, you use your smartphone with the Uber app and make a request. And if Uber drivers are available, they'll accept the request and pick up the passenger. Then at the end of the ride, payment is made through the Uber app. There is no tipping, no need for cash or credit card. Then, after the ride, passengers rate their drivers, and also drivers rate their passengers too. And as a passenger, you can then receive a receipt via email that shows not only the financial details of the transaction, but the route taken by the driver on a map. Now, I've used Uber a few times in Washington, D.C., and was pleased with the experience. No extortion of tips, polite and courteous drivers, clean cars, offers of bottled water each time, a bowl of wrapped candy on the seat beside me, and magazines to read in front of me. People like Uber, especially the young millennials I know that live in cities where Uber operates. And these are the type of people that Wichita is desperately trying to appeal to. So you may be thinking, isn't it great that Uber has expanded to Wichita? Yeah, Uber is great if you value innovation and progress. But not everyone does. I think there's going to be a scuffle. In 2012, 2 years ago, Wichita passed new taxicab company regulations. They create substantial barriers to entering the taxicab market. Some of the most restrictive include these. You have to have a central office staffed at least 40 hours per week, a dispatch system operating 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, enough cabs to operate citywide service, which the city has determined is 10, and you have to have a supervisor on duty at all times cabs are operating. Now, these regulations protect Wichita's existing traditional taxicab industry. There are 3 such companies in Wichita, with 2 having the same ownership. And already, one owner is speaking out against Uber. The taxicab companies that benefit from the restrictive Wichita regulations are likely to fight to keep their competitive barriers in place. The question is this: does Uber fall under the scope of these regulations? Well, so far, the city's position is this, according to reporting in the Wichita Eagle. From the government side, interim city attorney Sharon Dickgraff said Uber is not a taxi service because the private cars its drivers use are not equipped with taxi meters. Well, I'll expect the city's position to change when the city realizes that Uber cars do indeed have meters. Not clunky old-fashioned meters, but meters running on smartphones that track journeys using GPS. After all, Uber charges for its trips just like traditional cabs. There's a fee to enter the cab and then charges based on distance traveled and in some cases time. In Wichita, Uber charges a base fare of $2 plus 20 cents per minute and $1.65 per mile plus a $1 safe rides fee with a $5 minimum. And when you request a ride with Uber using your smartphone app, Uber can give you a fare quote to your destination. Now, the overhaul of Wichita taxi regulations in 2012 was partly inspired by the perception that taxi drivers were not projecting a good image for the city. Now, there are regulations that, in addition to the above, require standards of dress and hygiene and knowledge of the geography of the city and the area and working knowledge of local public and tourist destinations and attractions. Yeah, cabbies must take a customer service class, one delivered by city bureaucrats. So while Wichita has many regulations for the taxi industry, the city failed to enforce a really important regulation, which is that convicted sex offenders should not be taxi drivers. But through the city's mistake, a mistake that the city admitted, one such man was granted a taxi driver license. He is now serving a lengthy prison sentence for raping one of his passengers. Now, the standard argument against Uber is that it is unfair because Uber does not have to follow laws and regulations. But Uber is in fact regulated by a very powerful force, and that is the marketplace. Remember, passengers rate their Uber drivers. Can you rate your traditional Wichita taxi driver? I don't think so. And what if you felt that your traditional Wichita taxi driver was padding the fare by taking a roundabout route? Do you think you could persuade the present taxicab company of that? But Uber trips are monitored by GPS. Passenger receipts have a map that shows the route taken, which could be the basis for a fare review. Yes, the traditional taxi industry complains that Uber does not have to follow laws and regulations, but that's nonsense. Uber drivers must follow traffic laws. Uber drivers and passengers must observe the most fundamental of laws, which is don't hit people and don't take their stuff. Beyond that, the taxi industry laws and regulations are from a bygone era. Now, the traditional taxi industry is comfortable with these laws and regulations. The taxi cab companies can cope with them, and they make it difficult for competition to form to challenge the taxi companies. The purpose of these laws and regulations is not to benefit passengers in most cases. Instead, they exist for the benefit of the taxi cab industry, and by doing so, they stifle competition and innovation. But there is a transformation underway. Wichita can stop it if it wants to. I'm sure the city, if it wants, can formulate laws that would drive Uber out of Wichita. But that would be a mistake. The city says it is considering whether this industry, Uber in particular, needs regulation. The question I have is this: has the city of Wichita earned the right to regulate taxis? And I think the answer is no. The city has created regulations that prop up the near monopoly of traditional taxi cab companies, ones that stifle innovation, but failed to protect passengers from being raped by convicted sex offenders. Beyond that, the city has to decide whether it can back off its heavy-handed regulation and allow market-based innovation to thrive. The city has to decide in favor of customers or the traditional taxi industry and its near monopoly ownership. It's a decision that will let us learn a lot about the future direction of Wichita. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Will the proposed Wichita sales tax result in more paved streets? Well, it depends on what you mean by pave. Now, of the proposed Wichita sales tax that voters will consider in November, a portion is scheduled to be used for streets. The specific language in the ordinance that the Wichita City Council passed on August 5th states, with an amount not to exceed $27.8 million of such tax applied for street maintenance and repairs. But maintenance and repairs may mean different things to different people. The Yes Wichita group that supports the sales tax states this on their website. What happens to neighborhood streets if we pass the sales tax proposal? Well, the city would contract to pave an additional 111 miles of neighborhood streets. This would help catch up with the backlog with an infusion of additional resources targeted to some of the worst streets in the city. It would join the $8 million in regular funding to pave more than 1,900 miles of neighborhood streets. And appearing on a radio program, Yes Wichita spokesman John Rolfe said, "We'll be able to double the number of miles of paved streets over the next 5 years." Now, this sounds as though sales tax money will be used to convert dirt streets into concrete or asphalt streets. That, I believe, is what most people would conclude when reading or hearing the language produced by the Yes Wichita group. But that's not what will happen if the sales tax passes. No sales tax money will be used to convert dirt streets to concrete or asphalt streets, which is the normal meaning of pave. Here's how dirt streets are paved in Wichita. The surrounding property owners or business owners petition for the formation of an improvement district. And if a successful petition is filed, the city pays the street, and then the property owners in the improvement district pay the cost. There's a city document titled Petitioning for Residential Street Paving that explains in more detail. So, how will sales tax proceeds be used regarding streets if the sales tax passes? Well, a presentation on July 22nd to the City Council held this. The sales tax funds would repair 111 lane miles of streets over the next 5 years, focusing on some of the worst residential streets in Wichita. Coupled with the current CMP budget allocation of $8 million, a total of 1,964 lane miles will be repaired over the next 5 years. Now, a little backwards arithmetic shows that without the sales tax revenue, the city plans to pay for the repair of, 1,853 lane miles. The sales tax would increase what is already planned and budgeted through existing funding by an additional 6%. As for John Rolfe's contention that we'll be able to double the number of miles of paved streets over the next 5 years, even if we grant him some slack that he used pave to mean repair, the city won't be able to double the miles. Instead, city documents indicate that the sales tax will allow for an additional 6% in the number of lane miles to be repaired. That's quite different from doubling, which means to increase something by 100%. So, has the Yes Wichita group been merely careless in using the word pave? Or is the group trying to present the proposed sales tax as something other than what it really is? Well, since I published an article on this at the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org, the Yes Wichita page has changed. Now the term resurface is used, although pave is also used. Should we be concerned about errors like this? Well, the Yes Wichita site had been online with these errors for at least 2 weeks. Hadn't any of the members of the Yes Wichita team noticed this error? Or did they notice the error but not think it was worth a correction? Now, these questions assume the error was innocent and just sloppy use of language, confusing the meaning of pave with maintenance and repairs. But it could be more serious. It could be that the Yes Wichita campaign team is uninformed or misinformed about details of how sales tax money would be spent. Or it could be that the Yes Wichita team is deliberately misleading Wichitans about how sales tax money would be spent. I don't know. But Wichita voters need to think about this. Is this error an indication of Yes Wichita and the city's attitude towards and their concern for factual information? Voters need to be aware. Well, that's all for Wichita Liberty this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Bob Weeks.